The first lesson in Unit 3 is going to be about evaluating nth roots and using rational exponents. And rational, guys, just means fractions. So we're going to be looking at how to simplify and operate with expressions that have exponents that are fractions. So in general, for an integer n greater than 1, if some power or some number to that power of n equals a, then b is an nth root of a. So an nth root of a is written as n is your index and a is under your radical. So the square root, that's the part that's called the radical. And the index is the little number inside of your, or on the outside of your radical. So you can write the nth root of a as a power of a. So you can go in between exponential and radical form. So if you wanted to write the square root of a, just like the lead coefficient of 1, we don't ever write the power of 2 or the index of 2. So whenever you guys don't see a number value in your index, you have to assume that it's talking about the square root. So this is a to the first power with an index of 2. So this is a to the 1/2 power. 2 goes on the bottom, index goes on the bottom, power under the radical goes on the top. So if you have the cubed root, or the third root of a, you still have 1a underneath here, but it's now an index of 3. Same thing with the fourth power, or the fourth root of a single a, index of 4. Fifth root of a, single a underneath, fifth root, index of 5. So in general, for any integer n greater than 1, we can write this in exponential form as well. So if you have the nth power of some number a, you have 1a underneath to the power of n, or with the index of n. So let's go down here and look at your key concept notes, and it talks about actually finding the roots of these values. So if we're looking at that first side, and that's talking about when n is an even integer. So that means if n is an even integer, it's talking about your index. So like the square root of -81, that would be the second root of -81. So 2 numbers. So if we think about this, it's going to be the same. It has to be the same number. It can't be a positive and a negative. It's 2 positives or 2 negatives. So never in our lifetime can we ever multiply 2 negatives and 2 positives together and get a negative value. So again, your imaginary values come into play. So if a is less than 0, so if your a underneath your square root is a negative value, you won't have any real roots as long as your index is even. It'll have to be imaginary. So when a equals 0, when your number underneath that radical is 0, you can only have one solution because you can't have a positive or negative 0. And that one real root is at x equals 0. And then the last place, if you have an even index of a positive value, so a is greater than 0, you're going to have 2 real roots. Positive and positive 9 multiply to get you 81, but negative 9 and -9 multiply to get you 81. So if you have an even power or an even index, these are your possibilities. If you have a negative value underneath there, no real values, just imaginary. If it's positive, you're going to have 2. So now let's go over and look if odd isn't, or if n is an odd integer. So if your index is an odd number. Okay, so when n is an odd integer, so again, when your index is odd, n is talking about your index. If it's an odd number, this is where we talked again about those even number of negatives or odd number of negatives. If we're trying to get 3 values that multiply to get you negative 27, that they have to be negative. Negative 3, negative 3, and negative 3. Cubed root means what multiplies 3 times to get you 27 has to be negative 3. It can't be positive and negative because a positive 3 is going to give you a positive 27. So the only way to get to negative 27, multiplying the same number 3 times, is to use the value negative 3. Okay, so if we have the cubed root of 0, what's the only number that multiplies 3 times to get you 0? 0. And if your number inside is greater than 0, so if it's positive, then you can't have a negative value because negative and a negative and a negative is still going to give you a negative value. So if we're trying to get to this positive 27, we need a positive 3. So when you're looking at this, guys, what you have to remember is that if your index is even, so if you have a second, fourth, sixth, eighth root, or eighth index, if that little number on the outside of your radical, that index, is even, when you're finding the value, if you're evaluating for it or solving for it, you need both the positive and negative value. And we've talked about it before, just a reminder. So if an even index, positive and negative values. Now, if we're looking at our examples, it says find the indicated real nth roots of a. So it wants you to identify what is a, what is n, set up an expression, and then evaluate for it. So let's look at letter B. So again, a is under your radical, and n is your index. So we have the 4th root of 81. So this is where that orange sheet is going to come in handy, guys, that I had you fill out at the very beginning of class. So looking at your sheet, we're looking at the 4th root of 81. So we need to go to n to the 4th power and then find the value of 81. So looking across the top, where do you see n to the 4th? Because that's our index. We need to look down that column and see where we find 81. So what value to the 4th power would equal 81? And if you're looking at it, it should be 3. But what you guys have to be careful, our index is even. So it's the 4th power. So not just positive 3 multiplied 4 times would give us 81, but also negative 3. So positive or negative 3 would get us the value of 81. So this could be positive or negative 3, this expression. You guys could also write it in exponential form. I think the easiest way to do it is to write it in that radical form with the square root. But if you wanted to, once you had it in this 4th root of 81, you could say, okay, well, 81 to the 1/4 power. But again, if you can't use your calculator, then you can't really say, okay, what is 81, your little caret, to the 1/4 power. So I think it's easiest to use that chart. But it'll still be positive or negative 3. So you guys try letter A. I'm going to flip over and try some on the next page.